and welcome to this EBTS talk. My name's Chris Poole. I'm the chairman of the European Boxwood and Topiary Society, and today's talk is Historic Houses by the Thames, the last before our summer break. And the gardens that we're going to look at today are for two historic houses, Marble Hill House and Ham House. And to give you an idea of where they are, here we are at Kew Gardens, flying down Syon Vista towards Syon House. Syon House has been in the family of the present owners for more than 400 years, and now even has its own Hilliers Garden Centre in the outbuildings. Crossing over the river, we see the King's Observatory set in 7 acres of the old deer park. This was commissioned by King George III in 1769. Flying further upstream along the winding River Thames, we'll arrive at Marble Hill House, now looked after by English Heritage, but originally built for Henrietta Howard, mistress of King George II, when he was Prince of Wales. Some of the gardens are being recreated, and Kate Slack, the head gardener at Marble Hill House, will guide us through this project. Turning to look south across the Thames, we come to the National Trust's Ham House, which was built in 1610. It's the creation of a courtier of Charles I, William Murray, and his daughter, Elizabeth. And I'm delighted to introduce Kate Slack now, who is going to show us how she and her team have done work creating a new garden in a historic house setting. Kate.
Hi. Hello, everybody. I'm Kate Slack. I'm the head gardener at Marble Hill Park. So the Marble Hill Revived project is a heritage lottery funding project. We started in 2019 and we received £4 million to restore the gardens and the house at Marble Hill Park. As part of the project, we're restoring the house, but we're also restoring the gardens that belong to Henrietta Howard. She was much more than just the mistress of King George II. She was an independent woman in her own right. She had quite a literary circle around herself, and she built the gardens around Marble Hill Park. This is the plan which we have been restoring the gardens back to. This was found in the Norfolk Records Office, and it was a plan which is attributed to James Dorrit. It's very, very precise. When you look at it, you can see even down to the number of trees in some of the quarters. It shows the 9-pin bowling alley. It shows the grotto, and it shows the number of trees in the avenue. So it really is a very precise plan, and this is what we've been using to restore the gardens back to. If you look at an aerial photograph of the Marble Hill Park, you can see that the bones and the structure of the gardens are still very much there. So in the middle is the house, and the 4 quarters of the Woodland Quarters are still there and have been there ever since we've known. The centre is what we call the oval lawn, which is still very much there. The structure of the oval lawn is still very much there. The grotto is still there to this day, and that was rediscovered back in the 1980s and restored. And the 9-pin bowling alley, if you see this square there, the archaeology has actually found the base of the 9-pin bowling alley, which would have been there in Henrietta's time. The structure of the lawn is still very much there. So there is a terrace, it's raised, and the avenues would have gone down to the river to frame the house, the view from the house to the river. So this is what we're dealing with, but the bones and the structure of the garden is still very much there today. This is the landscape architect's plans for the gardens. So we are really trying to recreate it back to exactly what we think Henrietta would have had at the time. So it is almost an exact plan of what Henrietta had. So we have 4 different quarters. The top right-hand quarter is the orchard quarter. The top left-hand quarter is the icehouse quarter. The quarter here is what we're calling the flower bed quarter, and the quarter here is what we're calling the 9-pin bowling alley quarter. They were called northwest quarter, southwest quarter, but it was just too difficult for us and myself and the volunteers to remember. So we've called them according to what is the dominant feature in each quarter, and it seems to work really well. The tree avenues, which we've restored, this is a print from 1780, and if you see the trees, they look quite odd to us, as they would have taken the lower limbs off and created almost what we think of as a lollipop tree, but it was the fashion at the time. And we haven't done that because they do look a bit odd to the modern eye, but it would have framed the view all the way down to the river. Historically, Henrietta Howard had the first avenue was horse chestnuts, but we haven't been able to plant those in the park really because of the canker that we have at the moment with horse chestnuts. So instead, we've planted Aesculus indica, which is the Indian horse chestnut. It's slightly smaller than the normal horse chestnut, but it's actually a really elegant tree. The leaves are lovely, elegant leaves in a way compared to horse chestnut. It flowers about 6 weeks after the horse chestnut, but that you still have those lovely pink candelabra flowers. This is an established tree at Kew Gardens in front of the orangery. But in 20 years' time, we'll have this lovely vista running down from Marble Hill House all the way down to the river. And this photograph gives you an idea of what an elegant avenue of trees that will provide for the Marble Hill Park. The next avenue of trees that we've chosen is the black poplar. It's a really interesting tree, and it is now Britain's rarest native tree. It was very, very important back in the time. It was used for timber. It's been found for floors on the Mary Rose. It was used for all types of timber, and it was very common in the landscape. If you see the bottom right hand painting, it's a constable painting, and these trees in the background are actually black poplars. So they were very, very common in the landscape, but also particularly they're very important for moths, which feed on the leaves and need the nectar from the flowers. There is a conservation effort going on at the moment to try and conserve the black poplar, because it actually is very important both for wildlife and for our landscape. The next avenue of trees that we've chosen is white poplar. It's quite a magical looking tree in the distance. You can see on the right hand photograph, it has this very white silvery undersides of the leaf, which when it shimmer, it really looks beautiful in the distance. And the flowers on it, when they seed, it almost looks like it's snowed on the ground. This again was chosen because it's very important for wildlife, very important for different types of moths, but also in the next photograph, you'll see it provides a really lovely contrast between the black poplar and the white poplar and the Aesculus indica. This is a photo of the tree avenues when they were planted. The trees in the foreground are the white poplars, and you can see how they actually do look very silvery and white. The ones closest to the river are the Aesculus indica. We feel that this is really going to be quite beneficial for visitors in the future because we are getting hotter summers. This area of the park, there was no shade, and it will be fantastic for people to be able to sit and picnic in the shade. You can see someone actually lying out in the sun there, but he's missed the shade. But these avenues will really bring back that frame of the house down to the river, provide lovely shaded avenues, which is what would have been there in Henrietta's time. So the Woodland Quarters, these are the main areas that myself and the volunteers have been all involved in restoring. It's not very good print, I'm afraid, this, but it just gives you the idea that the very 4 distinct woodland quarters. So the first quarter is what we call the orchard quarter, and you can see this is from the landscape architect's plan. So the plan is to have the back half of the quarter planted up with native shrubs. So we planted it with things like dogwood, privet, hawthorn, and roses. This is to provide a habitat for wildlife because we've removed some of the shrub from these quarters, but it also will provide a screen from the front of the house. So originally there would have been a screen of greenery, evergreens, so that you couldn't actually see into the gardens from the front of the house. The front of this quarter is the orchard. So we've planted up stone fruit orchard. So it's things like damsons, plums, greengages, and cherries. So the public will be able to wander in through 2 exits. They'll be able to wander in through here, and the grass is a wildflower meadow. It's quite a flowery mix, this, and It did really, really well last year. We were very pleased with it. But we'll be mowing paths through the wildflower meadows, so people will be able to wander through to give them an idea what a traditional orchard would have felt like. And there's an exit here, so you can wander through various mown paths through the orchard, through the wildflower meadows. This is what we started off with. So this is the orchard quarter before we started clearing it. The top right photograph, you can see a photo. It was a beautiful hornbeam tree, which we've kept, but you couldn't see anything of it. It was a real specimen tree. The ground was covered with ivy, and we had an awful lot of snowberry and laurel in there. So it was all self-seeded, and it had just all self-seeded since the 1980s. 1987, when we had the storm, there was a fence put around it to protect it, and it was just left. You can see the bottom right photograph, there was a lot of laurel, and you can see the chestnut paling fences which went all the way around it. This really was just quite ugly. People used to kick it in to let the dogs in. It used to be quite dark and sociable areas. And the bottom left-hand photograph is the first day when we had our community clearing day. So our volunteers went in and we cleared absolutely everything by hand, all the ivy, we cut down the laurel ourselves. The tree work was done by consultant tree surgeons, but mainly it was volunteers who cleared this by hand. Once we'd cleared, you can see the bottom right-hand photograph. It was just basically soil. So we had quite a big job on our hands. You can see the back half is the beds where we were planting up. The bottom left-hand is actually quite an important day, because that was the first day we actually started planting, and you can see how we hadn't planted anything. The planting boards are absolutely pristine and clean, and it was quite a historic day for us starting to plant in the woodlands. The top left-hand photograph was our first consignment of plants which arrived, and I was so excited I felt I had to take a photograph of them. You can see the bare root shrubs all the way down the right, and we had ferns and evergreens. And then the top right-hand photographs, the volunteers planting the orchard. So most of this work was done by volunteers. It was done by hand, and cleared by hand and planted by hand. So this was once we'd cleared. The top right-hand photograph, we had to put a lot of topsoil on in order to be able to plant all the shrubs, because there were a lot of roots, which made a really good bed for planting the shrubs and the evergreen plants at the edges. If you look at the top left-hand photograph, so this is a yew hedge which runs all the way down to the house, and then we have a strip of grass which is formal, so it gives it a real formal feel. And then we've planted rows of elms. The reasons why we planted elms were because they would have been historically there at Marble Hill Park, and old photographs, black and white photographs, show that elms were predominantly the tree that was growing at Marble Hill Park. But it gives a really lovely formal feel to the entrance to Marble Hill Park. So there'll be very formally clipped yew hedges, a very formally cut grass strip in all of the quarters, and then rows of elms. The bottom photograph shows you the Wildflower Meadow area where we'll be planting the orchard and the wildflowers. So this is the Wildflower Meadow once it took off. If you see the bottom left-hand photograph, it was actually a real success. We had so many flowers in it last summer, mainly mallows and achilles. And interestingly, this year, it looks like we've got a lot more oxeye daisies coming back. And that's really the beauty of the Wildflower Meadow. It's quite ephemeral. You won't know what's going to dominate each year. This top left-hand photograph is our horticultural apprentice, Jack. We cut it using a mechanical scythe. We cut it quite early because we wanted really to get the wildflowers and the grass to really establish the roots. So it was heartbreaking to cut it so early because it was so beautiful and so floriferous. But as the first year with the meadow, we really needed to get it cut and get the roots established. The top right-hand photo, you can see the orchard after we planted it. And the bottom photograph is actually from the scaffolding on the house. So it gives you a good idea of what the orchard quarter looks like, with the front half as an orchard and the wildflower meadows. This is the ice house quarter. So this is the ice house. And this is what it looked like before we cleared it. So the ice house was really quite hidden away. You could get through the gate and go and have a look at the door, but that was about it. This is the architect's plan for it. So each quarter very much has a different feel to it. And this to me is, we shouldn't say my favorite, but it just has a lovely peaceful feel to it. So you can wander through the gate, through the woodland. The path will lead you round to the ice house door. It curls around. And then the front half of it again is a wildflower meadow, but it's a more shady mix. It's a shady mix because we've reinstated the avenues of trees that would have been here in Henrietta's time. We've planted lime trees. Historically, they would have been oak trees, but because we have a problem with OPM in the park, we've decided not to plant too many oak trees. And here you see this little white square is where the ice house seat would have been. So you would have sat on the ice house seat, which is raised up, and you would have been able to look down the vista here. These are limes. There would have been an avenue that would have looked all the way down to the river. That avenue has been lost, but as part of the project, we're trying to reinstate it, and these lime trees are the start of reinstating that vista down from the ice house seat down to the river. So these are volunteers clearing the ice house quarter. It was quite an incredible job. We were digging out roots ourselves, clearing all the ivy. And really, I can't say how grateful I am to the volunteers because of the hard work that they put in. This is the ice house quarter. It was this spring. So the wildflower meadow seeded and took quite well. One interesting feature is you can see these old oak tree stands, which we'd left in. They're dead stands of oak trees, but they're exceptionally good for things like woodpeckers and bats, and they actually are quite almost architectural. But once we had cleared the woodland, we could see that they were in a plumb line, so we could actually see the original line of trees that would have been planted when Henrietta was building these. This is inside the ice house quarters, so this mound is the earth that goes over the ice house. We found it was so steep we had to terrace it, so we terraced it with some of the tree seedlings that have been cut down. We needed to be able to do that because the soil would have just rolled off, but actually has made quite a feature of the ice house. It's planted up with evergreens, so laurels, ruscus, ferns, things like that. Bottom middle photo is an idea of the feel of it. So you'll walk through the woodland and you'll be able to walk around to this curving path that brings you to the door of the ice house. These are some of my volunteers who have created a very straight edge to the path. These are some of the plants that we are planting in the woodland quarters. So we're planting privet, which is the top left-hand photograph, ruscus, which is butcher's broom, you might know it as, Poplar fruticosum, and the Guelder rose. So we planted plants that would have been available to Henrietta at the time. We don't know exactly what she would have had, but these plants would have been available to her. But we're also planting with wildlife in mind, so lots of flowers for pollinators and lots of berries for birds. The next quarter is the flower garden quarter. So this is the most colourful of the quarters, and it would have been there in Henrietta's time. The public will be able to wander in around the curving paths, and the yellow area is the flower garden. So this area is the only area we're planting sort of herbaceous, perennials, annuals, biannuals, and it will be very colourful. So it has a very different feel to the other quarters. That's one thing I've noticed since I've been restoring the gardens, is every quarter has a real different feel to it. So you feel, in a way, you've visited very different gardens every time you go into a different quarter. So this was the flower bed quarter. It was very dark. We had, again, this chestnut paling fence that ran all the long way along and had been vandalised in places. We had a lot of snowberry, which is this bottom right-hand photograph, and it was really, really difficult to dig out because it runners. It was a job and a half digging this out by hand. We managed it over, I think, a month. It took us a month to clear this quarter. And this is the flower garden quarter cleared and the start of building the beds. So the top right shows the wooden borders laid out. And you can see the bottom left-hand photograph again is another formal grass strip with elm trees planted. And this is us planting up the flower garden quarter. It was quite interesting to plant this up because I didn't have a planting plan for it, and it just basically gave me a list of plants, and I didn't really understand what they wanted. So we had a meeting with the guy at Sheffield University who specialises in planting for the 18th century, and he said it would have actually almost been like a sunburst. So the middle of it is a cone, it's an evergreen, but it would have almost have like rays coming out from the cone. And then within these rays, they would have planted in square blocks, but not in height or in drifts as we would plant these days. It was almost a working garden as well. So they would have been used for cut flowers for the house. It would have been used for herbs for the house, but also for annuals and biannuals. So these paths were actually gardeners' paths, so that the gardeners could have got in, cleared a block, if it was an annual block, taken it out and replaced it with something else. So it's very much a changing flower bed, which I'm really looking forward to managing and understanding how it would have worked back in the time. These are some of the flowers that we're planting there. So very traditional flowers. So we'll be planting wallflowers, stocks, anthuriums, pinks, and geraniums. And then the bottom left-hand photograph is sea thrift, which is basically edging the paths all the way around. The sea thrift is starting to come out now, and it makes a really lovely edging to the paths. So it will be a really colourful area of the garden, and it will really be very different to all the other quarters. And the final quarter, which is what we're calling the 9-pin bowling alley quarter. We've left areas of this as non-intervention areas because we feel like we need areas for wildlife to base it as a refuge for wildlife until the other areas establish. Once the other areas established, there will be quite a thick thicket of shrubs, and that will be a refuge for and habitat for wildlife, but we need to leave these for the time being until the other areas are established. We have planted along the edge here, but the public will be able to walk in through the paths and round out to the 9-pin bowling alley. This is what we're calling the 9-pin bowling alley, and you can see the paths around it and the non-intervention areas in the middle, which we've left for wildlife. These are some of my volunteers planting up paths that we've chosen as seed decks. So it's almost like when you play balls, it's kind of a soft, sandy effect to it, but it's still quite resilient. So these are the Hornbeam Arbors, and these will frame the oval lawn. You can see this is a view down from the house down to the river. The arbors will provide a shady area, and it would have been back in the day, it would have allowed the ladies of the house to walk from the house through the shade, down through the avenues towards the river to keep out of the sun. But they will provide a lovely frame for the oval lawn and reinstate that formal oval lawn, which is very much a feature of Marble Hill Park. And this is the 9-pin bowling alley, which we're reinstating, and the public will be able to come and hire the 9 pins and be able to play it. I also imagine people will bring their own balls along as you play balls in France. So it will be available for the public to use. This is the grotto, which will be the last part of the project, and we are doing the archaeology in the grotto in August. This was a big project, which we did all the way through December. You can see our volunteers, it took a lot of clearing, a lot of sawing to clear it in time for the archaeology, which we'll be doing in August. as you can see, the grotto, which I don't know if you can see my cursor. So the grotto will be the last thing to be done. You'll be able to enter the grotto. There were curling paths which curved all the way down into the grotto. It was quite a magical area. Henrietta Howard spent a lot of her time installing coral and shells into the grotto, and the idea was it was very scented plants. So it was a magical experience going around the curling paths and into this grotto full of coral and shells. And the final bit will be the Sweet Walk, which is the entrance from Richmond Park. The idea is that we're planting quite a lot of scented plants. So will be scented shrubs and violas and roses and things like lily of the valley. So you'll be able to wander through these areas, through the Wildflower Meadows, and hopefully they'll be flowering all the way from April through to October. And I'm just leaving with you a picture of Marble Hill Park in the frost, which was before we started the project. And I hope you all come and visit us when we're finished.
That was terrific. I first got to meet Kate when there was a request to come and have a look at three box trees that had been found in amongst the more wilderness areas of the park. And I have to say, wasn't able to get back to it until a couple of weeks ago when I met up with Kate to talk through what we were going to do on the talk today. The change is spectacular. So if you know the area, definitely go and visit. It is an amazing amount of work that the guys have done there, the volunteers. And it's going to be an absolute treasure for the locals and people visiting to spend time there. The good news is for us box lovers, the box trees, two of them are still there and looking great and putting on quite a lot of new growth. And also there's the formal yew hedges. So if you like a bit of the topiary stuff, there is a bit of that in there. Thank you very much, Kate. The second part of our talk tonight is a guided tour. We were supposed to be doing this in person, but because of the pandemic and what have you, we haven't been able to. So we went along to Ham House, and head gardener Rosie Fyles gave us a guided tour.
Hello, welcome to Ham House Garden. We're by the River Thames in Richmond in Surrey. It's a bucolic scene out there, but actually we're in Zone 4 in London. And we're standing outside the front of house where you'd arrive as a visitor. I'm sorry not to be able to take you on an actual tour, but hopefully we'll give you a sense of the garden and how we're managing the garden in the present day. And what you're looking at here is an arrival of stature, created partly, I guess, by the topiary on show. So the bay drums, actually multiple bays in there. And when I inherited this garden, there was a lot of strong feeling about the need to cut the bay drums by hand. So we'd gather an army of volunteers and get the secateurs out, and people would complain about the smelling of bay when they went home. And what we realised actually was that was probably completely unnecessary with this sort of topiary, and we've used electric shears on them for about the last 3 or 4 years. Very successfully, I think. They look really sharp. One thing we do afterwards is just go around with the secateurs and make sure that we're picking up any really ugly leaf cuts. But actually it's far quicker and gives a far sharper effect. And if you follow me now, I'm going to talk about the box. So the box here, to be honest, for a few years was probably quite neglected. It's north facing, it wasn't fed. And in very dry spells, which we've definitely had the last few years, it wasn't watered. There's no irrigation system set up. So we've been trying to look at ways of looking after the box here, given its status, and giving it more time, basically. And it's been very useful having dedicated volunteers looking after the box. One of the things, obviously, that upsets me, which I expect most of you will spot immediately, is the problems right there at the front, which any camera seems to catch. If we go and have a look, you'll see that we are applying a level of patience to the situation rather than trying to solve it very quickly by buying in larger specimens, we're using what we had propagated ourselves and accepting that it's going to take some time for these to grow into the shape. I don't know if you can catch this on the camera, but the soil here, excuse the weeds, the soil here is very, very fine, sandy riverbed soil. So starting them off young means the irrigation challenge is a little less full on for us and a bit more realistic in what else we have to manage. The yew cones I inherited at very different sizes, and gradually we're bringing them back to some consistency. Big questions here for us about how we manage things like where the yew cones come into the box. And I think we're getting there. I think the impression when you arrive now is one of consistency and huge formality, and that's the impression we want to create in a 17th century garden. So we just walked round from front of house, and we're walking the way most visitors do, although we don't tell them to, into the Hornbeam arch of the cherry garden. Put in 1975 as part of the recreation of this private garden. Hornbeam arch is one of those things that I look at and know that if I increase my tenure here and stay for even longer term, I'm going to have to consider what we do. So I'm not sure if you can catch the very healthy size of these hornbeams, but we're really putting them under quite a lot of strain, managing them like we are. And I think we've lost 2 in my time, but obviously the question about what we do in the long term and how we recreate this feeling, given that these are now in their 45th, 46th year, is quite a pertinent one. And I think if you follow me down and catch what's going on above, it's really, really beautiful and very atmospheric. But you can see close up, there's quite a lot of dieback. The growth on the hornbeam is very patchy in places. And it's a really difficult question, which I'm sure some of you are looking at in your own gardens, about how on earth you really feed a plant like this on a gravel path that's so dry. So some of the options you'd use ordinarily perhaps aren't there. We cut it once a year, and this is the one job that we get contractors in to do, mostly because we don't have the kit to do a really good job on site ourselves and all the training to hire the kit and use it. And I think that the challenge really is to find a really good contractor who respects the plants, respects the open garden for visitors, and really is striving for a good shape. I think we're getting there. And if the camera looks through, you sort of get this sense of intimacy in the arch, and then you get the view of the whole garden in front of you. And I think the yew hedging here is kind of the poor relation, but does give us that real sense of enclosure and privacy. And it was created as a private garden that was entranced from the private rooms of the house in the 17th century, and was the place where the family of the house relaxed, got the most out of their own garden space as they could, I guess. And it's also very much to be seen from above. So if you go into the house and go 3 floors up, you get that amazing view, which we've really thought about in how we manage the garden in terms of the spacing of the plants. And I'll talk about it in more detail as we go through. So you've followed me into the cherry garden now. And when you're looking after a historic garden, the garden was originally developed in from about 1610 onwards. People often assume that what they're walking into has a level of authenticity. And I have to tell them the cherry garden is authentic to 1975 National Trust garden design. So you can see it's a private garden linked to the private rooms of the house. And in 1975, it was the second garden taken on by the National Trust to recreate. And the designers of the time tried to put in something that really summed up a 17th century private garden. They didn't have evidence of a garden like this being here. They had evidence of the size of the private garden, but nothing else really archaeologically or in any other records. And so the components they chose are kind of quintessential, I guess, but have a little bit of a modern flair, I think. And we're now looking after 80 box cones, the short box hedging, and over 1,200 lavender plants in here. And we've made a few changes. So we've changed the cultivars of the lavender, mostly because we inherited a design that had a Dutch lavender and cotton lavender. And we found that the cotton lavender, although the texture and colour of it was really strong, it actually was starting to grow quite poorly in here and struggling with the conditions, and sort of let the shape and the uniformity down. So after much consideration in the National Trust and going right through the levels, we managed to get an agreement to actually put in 2 cultivars of lavender. They're quite modern. They're Sussex and Anniversary Bouquet. They're both Dutch in origin. And we tried to mimic the shape and colour of the cotton lavender in our choice. And what we found is that the blooming, starting a little bit late this year, but the blooming from about mid-June goes right through into September. We get a second blooming out of the Sussex. And the scents in here is what we wanted, which is a space full of scent, full of bees and other pollinating insects, but still with that real uniformity and consistency of shape and texture. And one of the things that's really surprised me in the last year and a half is that we've never had seating in here. We always thought, oh, the seating's going to compromise the design. We were being very traditional in our thinking. And actually, in a pandemic, when people are spending more time outside, the seating became really a no-brainer for people. So over there, we've put in some communal garden benches, and they're about the most popular thing that we've done in the last year, just giving people a chance to sit and enjoy this space. And we've actually come and sat in here ourselves very occasionally as well. And I can honestly say in the middle of June, or end of June, it feels like the south of France in here, which is fantastic. Let's go over and talk about the yew hedge. So this was a big wall of yew, and it had 3 windows in it, and the windows just looked through to the next yew hedge. And the first thing we thought about was whether we could actually put in yew windows into the other side of the hedge, so the other hedge. And when we go a bit closer, what I'm saying will make more sense. As some of you will already know, when you start to cut windows into established hedges, you suddenly find the stems are all in the places you don't want them. So a few compromises on that. But I hope that as we go through, you'll see it's starting to make sense, even though it was a retrospective idea. And the popularity of these windows can be seen by the wear on the grass. And this is grass wear we're happy about in the last couple of years. And it was really a EBTS trip to Cadman Manor that gave me the idea to look at this yew hedge slightly differently and think, would there be a way of cutting it that actually gave it some contour and some design, a pattern, having seen what was done there by their brilliant gardener. And we came back and talked about it and had to sort of convince ourselves it was worth the time and energy to do it. But actually, it took about 6 hours longer than a normal clip to put this in, so that's been a real lesson for us in terms of getting more creative with the hedgework. And the design is very, very simple, but it is inspired by the designs in the house. So we've got a marble floor, which is black and white and has these diamond shapes on it. And I think it's been a bit of a revelation, partly because it's as strong as in winter as it is in summer. And I think looking into this garden, in summer the lavender does its thing and you feel a real sense of kind of wow. But in the winter, just seeing this sort of really strong green and the shapes in it has really made visitors very, very happy, and they've given us a lot of compliments about it. And I'm really pleased to say that as time goes on, we thought, oh, this will be temporary and we'll let it grow back. As time goes on, we want to keep it, and we feel quite confident we can keep it as healthy and as looking as sharp as when it first began. And a lovely little idea from one of our volunteers to have some false window shapes as well, which I think adds to the playfulness of the whole thing. We have lots of foxes in here. I'm not sure if I can put that down to fox damage, but we'll be working on that and probably giving it an Esprit spray. And in terms of the lawns here, we are actually managing them differently. In the context of a really formal space, the lawn used to be bowling green, expectation. However, it feels really odd to us to be managing lawns in that way, given we're managing a lot of meadow spaces and encouraging biodiversity. So you can't quite see it yet because there hasn't been enough growth, but we are actually leaving this lawn long and just cutting narrow mower width edges and then edging finely. So we're giving it a sense of it being kept and to a certain extent manicured, but actually not ridding it of its diverse weeds or plants, as they should now be called, I think. So I should talk about how we're looking after the box. With the cones, it's been a task to get them all to a consistent height, and you can see here part of getting them back to some consistent height is also getting in there and allowing a bit more light in and a bit more air, to try and get the growth actually coming from the inside rather than just on the outside. And I think with watering in the driest conditions, and that means watering by hand with a hose and really drench watering each plant. So doing that, and then also SB spraying after cutting or pruning, I think we're winning. Certainly it is a bit more time consuming, but I think in the long term, with the challenges that the box health has, it's the right thing to do. And when people ask, well, you know, is it worth it? I do say, well, you know, shut your eyes and imagine this garden without box. And then if they're still being a little bit negative, I say, well, shut your eyes and imagine English gardens without box. And I think it is part of trying to see box as it's a plant with its own eccentricities and challenges. And I think particularly gardeners like me working in big gardens, we've not really seen that. It's just been a hedged cut. So we have changed our attitude. The challenges are very apparent on the short hedge. So we have visitors, particularly children, that come in and step on it. We have frost that take us and the hedges by surprise. So just when the hedge is putting on some new early spring growth, then there'll be a frost. And actually in previous years, we've looked at this type of orange damage and thought, oh no, it's blight, and been quite concerned, but nothing too serious for us, and it's more to do with frost. And we keep an eye on areas like this. So this one, actually looking at it closely, is prime for replacement, I think, with very, very little green growth. And that's just what's expected. This box has been in now 45 years, and really has been quite neglected in the past. So it's part of looking after this garden and keeping it sustained for the future, to expect to have to replace plants. I think the important thing is that most visitors, unless they're little ones and going to step on the box, are looking at this space from a bit of a distance. They're not coming in and wondering what on earth we've done there, or I hope they're not. And it's a constant challenge to keep it going, but I feel like people are really interested in the way that we're doing that now, and it definitely feels worth it. I wish I could take you up to the top floor, because for me that's probably the best view of the whole place. We've walked south towards Ham Common, which is straight down there, lovely long avenue, to the Wilderness. And the Wilderness is a 17th century garden concept where basically people would recreate a feeling of countryside in their large gardens. And actually this feeling of countryside was created in the context of quite a formal garden design. And if you were above here in a drone, you'd see that the shapes created by all these 16 compartments is that of a Union Jack flag. So it has some political connotations. You can hear the clipping going on in the background. We're getting a cut in on some hornbeam before our bees arrive, our new bees. And I just wanted to sort of have a walk around and share some of the things we're doing and some of the challenges we have in here. So follow me through. I think the first thing to say is that here historically would have been a space people felt comfortable coming on their own, having times of silence and contemplation, and also having a sort of secret liaisons. And in many ways it performs that function today. The odd embarrassing moment on a garden walk round at the end of the day. The hornbeam here is doing pretty well. We tend to lose a few plants a year and replant, like here, and that's just our normal maintenance. And I think the losses of plants are down to their age, and I think also down to lack of moisture. We have about 140,000 visitors a year at the moment, and they're all coming in and walking on these grass paths, historic grass paths, and inevitably there's a lot of compaction. Frustratingly, whatever we do in terms of lawn care here is compromised by its usage. And one of the things I do think about is whether at some point there's a decision to be made, and we reflect upon the use of grass and wonder whether actually it's the right thing to carry on doing here. And I think we'd be looking at gravel or something like gravel and putting that in. But standing here on a lovely May morning with all these different shades of green, I think you can probably get a sense of what changing to a gravel-like surface in here would do. It'd really, really change the character of the place. When I inherited the garden, these hedges were at quite different heights, so you'd go from one compartment to another and this sort of view would change. And so we decided we'd get them all to a consistent height. We got some tree surgeons in to help us with the larger specimens, and we chose an average height of a 17th century individual, which was 5'2". So you can peek over the hedges if you're of average height, but they still form that sort of sense of intimacy and enclosure. Another thing that we've done in here, which I hope you can see, is looked at the shrubs in the enclosed compartments. So you don't enter these, there are 8 of them, and shrubs of philauria and holly, and we've shaped them. So when you're on the terraces looking down from the house, the shapes are there, sort of reasonably formal and undulating. and give, I hope, a link to other parts of the garden and a sense to why there are shrubs in those compartments. And 4 of the compartments are called summer house, and that's because there are summer houses in each of them. These are 18th century reproductions of 18th century summer houses, and in here you get a kind of sense of something a bit different. It's a period to 1680 planting, and the idea is that people can sit in the summer houses and spend some time and reflect in a quiet space without hedge cutters going. We've done some new planting. We received a donation to do so, and from that sort of central area over there, we took out a really big, imposing cherry plum. We've put in this nice medlar and just sort of reinvigorated the planting with some herbaceous perennials, and really always trying to think about, as people enter these spaces, what view do they get, what first impression do they get, and as they enter these spaces, how we can somewhat sensitively manage the turf. Inevitably, the spaces where the turf gets the most wear are the entrances, and we just have to kind of accept that it's part of a management cycle, and that I don't think there'll ever be a day when there's no bare spaces in the wilderness grass. One of the challenges that we've inherited is that when this garden was recreated again, 1975, the trees that were able to be sourced then in the numbers needed were field maples of different clones, and as you could probably see, we have some very, very substantial specimens, some a bit less so, and unfortunately field maples do not respond very well to pruning. So if you cut field maple to prune shape, it will respond with a huge amount of additional growth. So in terms of managing this space to get some light onto our planting and onto the turf, the field maples provide us with some really unique challenges. And I think now, if you were redesigning this garden in the spirit of the 17th century design, but choosing specimens, you would probably have a much larger catalogue of trees that you could look through and source from. And perhaps those sort of decisions would be made with, 30, 40, 50 years hence in mind. It's lovely walking through these field maples in summer, and what we're doing, sort of staving off the eventual replanting or changing the surface in here, is gradually taking out a few of the trees that cause the most shade. And we're just walking to a space here where one has been taken out to try and create more light in this area. And the goal with this is to make choices about a limited number of trees to give as much light as possible by removing them, but also not to compromise the feeling in here of tree avenues. And I think we're probably right at that point now where the number we've taken out might be at a maximum. So without big health issues in the trees, I don't think we can take any more out without seriously looking at the whole design of the place. I'm going to stop now. It's frustrating that you can't be here. There's a lot more to see, so I've only shown you about half the garden, and I've probably only talked about a tenth of what I would have done if I hadn't been on film. Do come back and visit, and it would be lovely to host a proper face-to-face gathering at some point soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Rosie for guiding us around Ham House. And as she says, let's hope we can get together and do an in-person visit. We will be doing a new strand to EBTS, which will be called EBTS get-togethers, and they will be advertised shortly. One of which I will be hosting will be Ham House, because that's where I volunteer. In fact, I was there today clipping some of those hornbeam hedges. Thank you to Kate and to Rosie, but if you've got some questions, now is the time to ask them, and do feel free to chip in. Kate, we've got one. Let's start with you. We've got one from Camilla, who says, who had been taking care of or owned the property prior to English heritage, and why had it fallen into such disrepair, and had it been vandalised?
It would actually belong to the GLC before the English Heritage took it over. So English Heritage, I think, took it over 30 years ago. It was during the 87 storm that those areas were basically enclosed with chestnut paling fences and then just left. So it was just more a fact that it was just part of the council. There was no money to put into it, and English Heritage has just got this Heritage Lottery funding now to restore it, which is why we're doing it now.
Brilliant. And as I said, from my trip about a year apart, it was is the most amazing change. So if you get the chance, please go along and see it. Another question, Linda, this one's for you, Rosie. Linda says, given you're by a river, surely the water table's quite high, and surely this helps with the irrigation.
I wish it was that simple. So the meadow that sits in front of Ham House that runs to the river, in part is a flood meadow, but actually the historic sort of builders and architects thought about it really, really well, and the water never encroaches anywhere near the house. We have a ha-ha as well to that end. And actually, as soon as you get into the garden, you'll notice there's a terrace. So actually, the garden is sort of lower, slightly downhill. It's very, very dry soil. It's alluvial river soil. So it's not the South London clay that's around us. And quite a mixed approach to garden restoration in the mid-70s. So perhaps if the same sort of thinking and standards applied then as they would now, you'd plan for that sort of challenge and perhaps enrich the soil quite significantly at the start, but that wasn't done. So in some areas we're working knowing that we've got gravel paths about a foot below, and the soil is very thin. But to end on a positive note, we do have a Victorian water harvesting system that runs from the house. So we do have runoff water that we can use. So we have committed to never use mains water ever again. And so far we're doing quite well on that.
Rosie, we've got another couple of questions about SB spraying of the yew and the box.
SB, I don't know about Kate, but it was one of those things when I started working professionally, was like a kind of miracle product. It's a foliar feed, it's organic, so it feeds the plant, and it's also a contact pest control. So it does a number of jobs at one time. And I think that once you've sprayed it on any plant, I'd really recommend trying it on a rose or something like that. You can see the leaf response really quickly in a couple of days. It does really seem to do a miraculous job. Kate, do you have that experience, or do you think I'm fooled?
Yes, no, we do use it. I mean, the difference with us is that we're not an established garden at the moment, so we don't really have a lot of established plants. But yeah, I am using it, and it does seem like a miracle product, to be honest. Especially if you don't want to use pesticides and herbicides, it is fantastic. But once the plants are more established, we're definitely going to be using more and more of it as we go on.
So it's I'm not on commission, and it's called SB Plant Invigorator, and it's available domestically and commercially, obviously. And it's organic. So I'd really, for the health of your plants, it's a really useful thing to have up your sleeve.
And the good thing is, it's not from a foliar feed point of view. It's not. It's a very mild foliar feed, so it's not going to over promote growth in plants. If people were worrying about, say, using it on box, it doesn't over promote leaf growth and so on. I was just trying quickly to find out what the SB stood for, and I can't see what it stands for. So, yeah. Charlotte has said, have you noticed any dieback over the last year, and where can we buy SB from? Well, we've said that part, but dieback over the last year noticed? Obviously, Kate, you've all brand new plants, so hopefully not, but Rosie?
Dieback specifically in any type of plant, or?
In you, our colleague Charlotte, who says she lost you last year.
I don't know, Chris, you might be able to comment on this as well, but my feeling is that it's a sequence of weather that's really put some plants under stress, and which maybe we would have thought of as really not needing that much care, in times of extreme heat and then drought and then possibly flood, really suffers. And I think that's what we're putting a lot of dieback and health issues down to, that plants aren't really keeping up with the conditions they're facing, and then they're becoming more susceptible to other problems.
I think I'd agree with you on that. The emails into EBTS over the last year have a lot of things have come in saying, what's wrong with this plant? And you look at it and it's dried out, but it's dried out in a very slow, a long and prolonged drying out. So whereas you might not have thought necessarily having to water some plants in the past, we've had such long dry spells that even well-established plants are having difficulty. Obviously, with you, the other option is that it's too wet, but that even the last month of May, that I don't think even the yews have got too wet in that case. One for you, Kate. How did you cultivate the soil to do the new planting in the large areas?
We had to introduce topsoil for the planting for those areas, because we did leave quite a lot of established trees there, so the root zone was quite difficult to plant into. So a lot of the beds needed building up with introduced topsoil. In some of the areas there was quite a lot of because they had been woodlands, so it was quite rich in some areas, but most of them we did have to build up the beds with topsoil.
And when designing the areas, you had planting designs given to you. How much research had to go on to get the right plants for the right historic period? Because I know I've suggested some things to Rosie, and you just get, no, can't do that. It's not 17th century. So I guess you had exactly the same thing, or was all the research done?
Well, before I started, the research was done right. Mainly by Emily Parker, who is English Heritage Gardens historian, but also there were quite a few people from Sheffield University involved who specialise in 18th century gardens. So yeah, I didn't have the plans were there when I arrived, and the plant lists were there. So I was just buying the plants. I didn't have any choice in what was planted.
Out of interest, how many volunteers do you have?
At the moment, we've got 30 volunteers, and I don't think we're not really going to increase it anymore at the moment, because it's enough for what we need at the moment.
Okay, that's the questions that I've got from the chat. Anyone got any other questions? If you want to do so, just raise your hand. I'm getting a question here that says, how is the box this year? Well, Rosie, I over to you. How do you think it's doing?
Well, I'm going to bore on about the weather again, but I think the conditions have meant that the box moth caterpillar has been a bit subdued, and that's a good thing. I suspect that the very wet May might, if you've already got issues with the blight, exacerbate them. I think it'd be interesting to see the next sequence of weather we go through. But broadly speaking, it's okay so far.
Yeah.
We're quite happy with the way things are going, and I think EBTS has been very involved in some of the sort of innovative thinking about how to look after box and treat pests, and it does feel like the tide is turning somewhat. Either we're just getting used to looking after it, or the products and the techniques are improving.
There definitely are more products out there, and actually we're hoping in the next week to get agreement to try out a new product that should be in the UK this year, called Box Tree Pro. It's a pheromone lure that you put on the plants, and it does mating disruption. So we're going to try that out hopefully at Ham. We're hoping, fingers crossed, to get the go ahead to do that. And if you want more information on that, there'll be more once we get the go ahead on the EBTS website with details of how to use it. We're also trying out a new trap, which is a lot larger and supposed to be 5 to 10 times more effective. But the caterpillars have been a lot slower growing this year, which means they haven't been eating as much because the weather has been so cold and so on. But they are becoming near to full size, so they will be hatching out into pupating into moths shortly. Speaking of moths, do they happen to like poplars, Kate? Because I'm sincerely hope that the box moths don't like your poplars, because you were saying you planted more and they're particularly liked by moths.
Well, we're planting them really because we're trying to encourage the specific to poplars. So yeah, I mean, a lot of the part of the project is to increase habitat and diversity in the gardens. So we're not trying to discourage moths. There are a lot
Except
of
the box moth.
Except the moth, yes. But yeah, we're trying to encourage other types of moths.
Okay, well, I think on that, thank you very much to Kate and to Rosie for your time this evening. Excellent talks, amazing amount of information there. I can't emphasize strongly enough that you should go and visit both these properties. There's tons of great houses along the Thames, but please come and see us at Ham House or across the river at Marble Hill House, because the work Kate and her team have done is terrific, and the ongoing work that Rosie and the team at Ham are doing is also amazing. Thank you again, Kate. Thank you again, Rosie. And thank you all of you for joining us on this EBTS talk. And we'll see you again in October.